poor human mechanic gave his last heater to a freezing alien woman. By dawn, a royal ship landed. Why did a poor human mechanic give away his last heater to a freezing alien woman? And why did a royal ship land by dawn? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy emotional science fiction stories about humanity, courage, and unexpected encounters among the stars, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and for continuing to support the channel. Your support truly helps these stories reach more people. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, let's begin the story. If I give you this heater, one of us is going to have a very bad night, Ethan Cole muttered, staring through the frost-clouded doorway of his repair shop. The wind outside answered with a long metallic howl, rattling the loose panels of Dock 17 as if the entire settlement were trying to shake itself apart. On Kestrel 9, winter did not arrive politely. It pressed against steel, crept beneath door seals, thickened lubricant into paste, and turned every exposed breath into white vapor. Ethan pulled his worn canvas jacket tighter around his shoulders and glanced at the portable heater beside his workbench. The old machine clicked 3 times before its heating coil glowed a tired orange. It was ugly, dented, and held together with 2 replacement switches and a strip of heat-resistant tape, but it was the last working heater he owned. His main furnace had failed 11 days earlier, and the replacement control board cost more than he had made all month. For now, that little heater was the difference between an uncomfortable night and a dangerous one. Ethan was about to lock the outer bay when he heard something beneath the wind. Clang. He stopped. Another faint sound came from beyond the cargo ramp. Not machinery. Something lighter. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the storm. Snow scraped across his face like powdered glass. The temperature display beside the bay door flashed 12 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and the wind made it feel far worse. Hello. His voice disappeared into the darkness. The flashlight beam swept across stacked engine housings, frozen fuel drums, and the landing struts of an abandoned freighter. Then the light caught color where there should have been only gray. A hand. Blue-green fingers rested motionless against the snow. Ethan moved closer and found a woman curled beside the cargo ramp, half sheltered by a broken maintenance panel. She was humanoid but unmistakably alien. Her turquoise skin had faded toward a pale, icy blue, and strands of silver-white hair clung to her face. A damaged thermal suit covered most of her body, its status lights completely dark. Ethan crouched beside her and held 2 fingers near the side of her neck, searching for the faint rhythm his xenomedical training manual had once called a carotid equivalent. There, weak but steady. Her eyes opened for less than a second, revealing a flash of violet. Warm, she whispered. That was all. Ethan looked back toward his shop. Through the open doorway, the heater glowed beside his chair. He could almost feel its warmth from 20 feet away. He thought about the frozen pipes above his cot. He thought about the weather report predicting another 8 hours of storm. Then he looked down at the stranger again. Yeah, he sighed. I was afraid you were going to say that. Minutes later, Ethan had carried her inside and wrapped her in his cleanest thermal blanket. He set the portable heater beside her, turned the dial to maximum, and watched warm air begin to stir the silver strands of hair across her cheek. The machine clicked, groaned, then settled into a steady hum. Ethan stood there for a moment, rubbing his hands together as the cold already began reclaiming the rest of the garage. Then he unplugged the extension cable that led toward his sleeping room and connected every remaining watt to the heater beside the alien woman. Outside, the storm buried Dock 17 beneath another layer of snow. Inside, the last warm thing Ethan Cole owned belonged to someone whose name he did not even know. Ethan woke to silence so complete that for one confused second, he thought the storm had ended. Then the heater clicked behind him, and he realized the silence came from somewhere else. His own room had gone cold. Frost feathered the inside of the small window above his cot, and the metal wall beside him radiated the kind of chill that seemed to seep through clothing and settle directly into bone. He had fallen asleep sitting upright on an old storage crate, still wearing his work boots, insulated pants, 2 shirts, and the canvas jacket he normally kept for exterior repairs. His breath drifted in front of him in pale clouds. Across the garage, The alien woman was still asleep beneath the thermal blanket, curled near the portable heater. Color had returned to her skin. The turquoise tone was deeper now, almost luminous where the orange glow touched her cheek. Ethan checked the wall thermometer. 28 degrees Fahrenheit inside the shop. Miserable, but survivable. He stood carefully, his knees stiff from the cold, and went to inspect her damaged suit. The outer material was expensive, far beyond anything sold in Dock 17. Even the torn seams used memory thread stitching, the sort of self-sealing fabric he had only seen on diplomatic transports and high-end research ships. The heating regulator, however, was dead. Ethan removed the access plate with a narrow driver and frowned. The internal contacts were burned, the thermal relay was cracked, and one of the control bridges had fused into a blackened line. He dug through 3 drawers before finding something close enough to adapt: an old regulator from a mining drone, a copper bypass lead, and a ceramic connector he had been saving for a paying repair. "There goes another 10 credits, he murmured. "You always complain while helping people?" The voice behind him was weak, but clear. Ethan turned. The woman was awake, watching him with violet eyes sharper than he expected from someone who had nearly frozen outside a few hours earlier. "Only when the parts are expensive," he said. She pushed herself upright, keeping the blanket around her shoulders. "Where am I?" "Coal repair. Dock 17. Kestrel 9. Her gaze moved across the shop, taking in the stained workbench, hanging tools, patched ceiling panels, and shelves crowded with salvaged engine parts. "This is your residence." "Garage first. Residence by technicality." Her eyes settled on the heater beside her. "And your secondary heating system?" Ethan kept his attention on the regulator. "Working fine." The lie came too quickly. She stared at him for a long moment, then looked toward the dark doorway leading to his sleeping room. Ethan soldered the bypass wire into place, pretending not to notice. "Name?" he asked. "Nora." "Ethan." "Ethan Cole." He glanced up. "It is on the sign outside. I saw it before I lost consciousness." Her voice softened slightly. "Then you brought me inside." That part one remember. He fitted the repaired regulator into her suit and connected it to a diagnostic lead. A green indicator blinked once, then twice. "Good news. Your suit is not dead. It is just offended." Nora looked at the improvised parts. "You repaired that with mining equipment. Mining equipment has excellent manners if you wire it correctly." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched her expression. Ethan disconnected the lead. "Give it 10 minutes before you trust the heater function." She nodded, then quietly stood and walked toward the back room. Ethan opened his mouth to stop her, but she was already there. She looked inside. No heater, no warm vents, no backup system, just a narrow cot, a metal locker, frozen pipes, and a thin layer of ice along the floor seam. When she turned back, the humor had vanished from her face. "You lied." Ethan leaned against the workbench. "About what?" "The secondary heating system." That." Nora looked at the small heater glowing beside the blanket, then at the frost whitening Ethan's sleeves. "This is your only source of heat." He said nothing. "You gave it to me." Ethan shrugged once. "You needed it more." Her eyes narrowed, not with anger exactly, but with something he could not name. "And what happens to you if the temperature drops again?" Ethan glanced toward the rattling garage door as the wind rose outside. "I put on another shirt." "That answer makes no sense," Nora said, and Ethan could not tell whether she was offended by his logic or by the fact that he had said it so casually. The heater hummed between them, pushing a narrow stream of warm air across the garage while the storm pressed against the outer walls. Ethan returned to the workbench and checked the repaired regulator again. "Most things make less sense before coffee," he said. Nora did not smile this time. She stood near the doorway to his freezing room, the thermal blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, her violet eyes fixed on him. "You gave away your only reliable source of heat to someone you had never met." Ethan picked up a small diagnostic probe. "You were freezing." "That is not an explanation. It is the entire explanation." Nora slowly approached the bench. In the orange light, the color had returned fully to her turquoise skin, though she still moved carefully. "Among my people, emergency resources are assigned according to priority." Sounds reasonable. Position, responsibility, contribution, probability of survival. Every individual has a calculated value to the larger system. Ethan looked up. "You calculate who deserves a heater?" Who receives limited resources, she corrected. If there is only enough warmth for one person, it goes to whoever matters most to the survival of the group. Ethan considered that while turning her damaged suit over in his hands. And who decides who matters most? Nora hesitated. The system does. Systems are built by people. Not always people. Still built by somebody. The heater clicked behind them. Ethan pulled off the suit's outer access layer and examined the thermal network beneath it. Nora watched his hands move through the tiny components with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years making broken things useful again. You disagree with our method, she said. I did not say that. You did not need to. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Look, if I had one heater and two healthy people, maybe we would figure something out. But last night, there was one person standing and one person turning blue in the snow. That is not much of a math problem. Nora's expression changed, the sharpness in it giving way to something quieter. You would have done the same for anyone? Probably. Even someone you disliked. Depends how annoying they were. Her eyes narrowed. Ethan allowed himself half a smile. Yes, even then. For several seconds, there was only the soft buzz of the heater and the faint tapping of frozen debris against the roof. Nora looked toward the battered shelves, the unpaid invoices clipped beside the work terminal, and the coffee tin Ethan had been using to collect loose bolts. Your people must be wealthy to afford such generosity. Ethan laughed once. You have definitely never met my landlord. He lowered his gaze to the suit again, then stopped. Something near the internal temperature controller had caught his attention. The damage was too clean. He adjusted the work lamp and leaned closer. The outer casing showed ordinary exposure to cold, but beneath it, one connection had been separated with precise heat concentrated on a single point. Weather could freeze a regulator. A power surge could burn one out. Neither would leave this pattern. Nora noticed his silence. What is it? Ethan ran the diagnostic probe across the contact twice, hoping the first reading had been wrong. It was not. He looked at her. You said your suit failed after you reached Kestrel 9? Yes. Nora, this did not fail because of the storm. Her posture became perfectly still. Ethan turned the damaged component toward the light. Someone made sure your heater would stop working. For the first time since she had awakened, Nora looked genuinely afraid. It lasted less than a second, a tightening around her violet eyes, a tiny pause before she drew the blanket closer around her shoulders, but Ethan noticed. Mechanics survived by noticing what other people ignored. A vibration before a bearing failed. A smell before insulation burned. A silence where a machine should have been making noise. People were not entirely different. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were touching. Ethan said, placing the damaged regulator beneath the work lamp. This connection was separated from inside the housing. No storm did that. Nora stared at the component. Can you repair it? Already did. Then the problem is solved. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That is one way to describe attempted sabotage. Her gaze sharpened. You ask too many questions for a mechanic. Customers usually complain that I do not ask enough. He turned the suit over and examined the power distribution strip. Were you running from somebody? Nora looked toward the garage door, where wind-driven snow hissed against the metal. I was traveling. That was not what I asked. It is the answer I am giving. Ethan almost pushed harder, then stopped. Whatever had brought her to Dock 17 clearly belonged to a world far above his pay grade. He had bills due, a failing furnace, and 3 repair orders waiting whenever the storm released the settlement. He did not need royal mysteries or political conspiracies, if that was what this was. Fair enough, he said. Nora seemed surprised by his retreat. You are not going to demand an explanation? You nearly froze outside my shop. I helped. That does not purchase your life story. She studied him with the same strange concentration she had used when discussing emergency resources. You speak as though favors create no obligation. Good favors do not. Ethan returned the repaired thermal suit to her. Try it. Nora slipped her arms into the suit and activated the control panel. A soft blue light traveled along the collar, followed by the faint hum of internal warming fibers. Her shoulders relaxed almost immediately. It works. Mining equipment has excellent manners, Ethan reminded her. That finally earned a small smile. While the suit warmed, Nora wandered slowly through the garage. She stopped beside the terminal where Ethan kept his accounts. Several invoices blinked overdue. Beside them hung a handwritten board covered with names, ship models, repair costs, and amounts paid. Many balances ended with the same note: pay later. You operate this business very poorly, she said. Ethan snorted. Thank you. Half of these customers owe you money. More than half. Then why continue repairing their ships? Ethan tightened the cap on his soldering iron. Because a farmer with a broken cargo shuttle cannot bring food to market. A school transport with a dead coolant pump does not move children. People around here miss one paycheck, and suddenly one bad part becomes everybody's problem. Nora looked around the worn shop again. You could leave. Probably. A mechanic with your skill could earn far more on a central world. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The heater clicked softly between them. The man who owned this place taught me the trade when nobody else wanted an 18-year-old kid who knew more about engines than people. When he died, the creditors were going to strip the shop for parts. I used everything I had to keep it open. Why? Ethan glanced at the faded nameplate still bolted beneath his own sign. Because somebody kept the door open for me once. Nora said nothing after that. Outside, the wind suddenly weakened, and a pale gray light began spreading through the frost-covered windows. Ethan checked the time. Dawn was less than 20 minutes away. Then the entire garage brightened. Not with sunrise. A vast white glow poured through the upper windows, moving slowly across the ceiling. Ethan frowned and stepped toward the bay door. That is not weather. Nora went completely still behind him. The light outside grew brighter until every scratched tool and hanging cable in the garage cast a long white shadow across the floor. Ethan reached the bay controls and pressed the manual release. The door groaned upward 6 inches, caught against frozen tracks, then finally climbed with a protesting shudder. Cold air rushed inside. Beyond the threshold, dawn had turned Dock 17 into a landscape of silver snow and blue ice, but Ethan barely noticed the weather. Something enormous was descending through the clouds. The vessel moved with impossible grace for its size, a white and silver ship nearly 500 feet long, its smooth hull reflecting the weak morning light. 4 landing engines sent spirals of snow rolling across the empty repair yards. Along the ship's side glowed an 8-pointed golden star. Ethan had seen that symbol before, usually on news reports involving trade agreements, state ceremonies, and people whose clothing probably cost more than his entire garage. He looked over his shoulder. Nora had stepped beside him. The repaired thermal suit fit closely beneath the old blanket she still carried around her shoulders, but her posture had changed completely. The exhausted stranger from the snow was gone. Her back was straight. Her expression was calm. Even the silence around her felt different. You know that ship? Ethan said. Nora watched it land. Yes. I am guessing this is the part where you explain something. Probably. The ship touched down less than 200 yards from the garage. Its engines faded into a low vibration Ethan could feel through his boots. A wide ramp lowered from the underside of the hull, and several figures emerged wearing polished white armor marked with the same golden star. They moved quickly across the snow, followed by a tall officer in a dark blue uniform. People began appearing behind windows throughout Dock 17. Ethan could almost feel 100 neighbors wondering what kind of trouble the mechanic had managed to attract before breakfast. The officer stopped 20 feet from the garage entrance. His eyes moved from Ethan to Nora, and every trace of urgency vanished from his face. He lowered his head. The others followed. Your Highness, he said. Ethan did not move. For several seconds, his brain seemed to reject the words as defective input. Then he slowly turned toward Nora. She gave him a small, almost apologetic look. Your Highness. Ethan repeated. There were circumstances. You told me your name was Nora. My name is Nora. You left out a fairly noticeable job title. One corner of her mouth lifted. You never asked what I did for a living. Ethan stared at her. I repair cargo engines. Most people who walk into my garage do not turn out to be royalty. The officer approached. Crown Princess Nora Vale of House Astor. We have been searching the entire northern sector. Your shuttle disappeared from tracking nearly 11 hours ago. His attention shifted toward Ethan and the open garage. His expression became cautious. Who is this man? Nora answered before Ethan could. Ethan Cole. He found me outside during the storm. The officer looked past her toward the heater glowing beside the workbench, the patched thermal suit, and Ethan's frost-covered sleeping room visible through the rear doorway. He kept you here? No, Nora said quietly. He kept me alive. The officer studied Ethan again. Then House Astor owes you a debt. Ethan rubbed warmth back into his hands. I would settle for somebody fixing the weather. No one laughed except Nora. Then another royal official hurried down the ramp, carrying a scanner. He stopped beside the damaged thermal suit component Ethan had left on the bench and examined it. His face changed. "Your Highness," he said carefully. "This regulator was deliberately disabled." Nora's faint smile disappeared. Ethan looked from the official to the royal ship outside. Suddenly, the arrival felt much less like a rescue and much more like the beginning of a problem. The royal officer's scanner gave a soft warning tone, and the atmosphere inside the garage changed immediately. Two members of the security detail stepped closer to Ethan, not threatening him, but watching him with the careful attention reserved for unknown variables. Ethan noticed because mechanics noticed pressure changes, whether they happened inside engines or inside rooms. The tall commander looked at the damaged regulator, then at Ethan. "You had access to Her Highness's suit. After I found her freezing outside," Ethan said. "And you dismantled the thermal controls. Because they were broken. And now you claim they were deliberately disabled." Ethan folded his arms. "I do not claim anything. The metal does." The commander's expression hardened. "Until we establish what occurred, Mr. Cole, protocol requires that you remain here." Ethan glanced around his own garage. "That should be easy." Nora stepped forward before the commander could answer. The old thermal blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, revealing the repaired suit beneath it, patched with mismatched components and a dull mining regulator that looked painfully ordinary against royal technology. "Commander Hale," she said, and her voice carried a quiet authority Ethan had not heard the night before. "You will not treat him as a suspect." Hale lowered his head slightly. "Your Highness, someone interfered with your equipment. We cannot assume anyone is uninvolved. Then begin with the people who had access to my shuttle before I left." "We will." "And Ethan?" Nora looked directly at the commander. "He had every opportunity to leave me outside. Instead, he gave me the only working heater in this building." Hale's eyes shifted toward the back room, where frost still traced the walls around Ethan's cot. Nora continued. "He repaired my suit with his own parts. He asked for no payment. He did not even ask who I was." Ethan scratched his jaw. "In fairness, I asked your name." Nora glanced at him. "Your investigative discipline is astonishing. I have been told that." The corner of her mouth moved, but Hale remained serious. "House Astor rewards service appropriately. Mr. Cole may name his compensation once the security review is complete." Ethan looked at him. "Compensation for what?" "Saving the crown princess. I did not sell her heat." The words came out flatter than he intended. Hale seemed genuinely confused. "I did not suggest you did. You just asked me to put a price on it." Silence settled over the garage, broken only by the heater fan and the ticking of cooling metal. Ethan pointed toward Nora. She was cold. "I had a heater. That is the whole transaction." Nora watched him carefully. Something in her expression softened, but before she could speak, the royal technician approached with the damaged regulator. "Commander, there is another issue." He placed the component on Ethan's bench. The disabling pattern matches a controlled thermal pulse. Royal maintenance equipment can produce one. Hale became very still. How many people had access? Too many. Ethan leaned closer to the regulator. Maybe not. Everyone looked at him. He rotated the component beneath the work lamp and pointed to a faint discoloration along one edge. This was done after the suit passed its final diagnostic. Whoever touched it knew exactly where the inspection sensors would stop looking. The technician frowned. That would require advanced knowledge of royal systems, or someone who fixes machines for a living. Hale studied him. "Can you determine when it was done?" Ethan looked toward the royal ship waiting beyond the snow, then back to Nora. "If you let me inspect her shuttle, I can probably tell you more." Nora answered before Hale could. "Then, that is what we are going to do." The wrecked shuttle rested on the far side of Dock 17, half buried beneath wind-packed snow and surrounded by portable royal lights. Ethan walked around it once without touching anything. The vessel was sleek, expensive, and far too elegant for a repair yard where most ships arrived with mismatched panels and handwritten maintenance tags. Commander Hale stood nearby with two royal engineers, both wearing polished diagnostic visors that made Ethan feel underdressed in his grease-stained jacket. Nora remained beside him, the repaired thermal suit now holding steady at a comfortable temperature. Primary analysis indicates atmospheric interference followed by thermal system failure, one of the engineers said. Ethan crouched beside an access panel near the shuttle's lower service spine. Maybe. The engineer looked down at him. Maybe. Ethan brushed frost away from the panel seam. Atmospheric failures are messy. This is neat. He opened the hatch and studied the power junction inside. 3 status lines glowed green. One did not. What are you seeing? Nora asked. Ethan pointed to a narrow connector deep inside the housing. That relay feeds the cabin thermal grid, suit recharge ports, and emergency beacon. Hale frowned. All 3 systems failed. Exactly. The senior engineer stepped forward. The relay could have overloaded during descent. Ethan looked at him. Then the insulation around it would be discolored. He tapped the casing lightly. It is clean. He removed the connector and held it beneath a portable lamp. Along one edge was the same faint silver mark he had seen on Nora's suit regulator. Controlled thermal pulse, Ethan said. The royal engineer went silent. Nora's expression tightened. The same method? Close enough that I would not bet against it. Ethan slid farther beneath the service spine, ignoring the cold seeping through his knees. He followed the wiring toward the diagnostic core and stopped when he found a maintenance seal. It was intact. That bothered him more than a broken seal would have. Interesting. Hale crouched nearby. What? If somebody opened this panel manually, the security tag should have logged it. It did not. Right. Ethan stood and wiped his gloves against his pants. So whoever changed the relay did not come through the panel. One engineer frowned. There is no other access route. Ethan looked toward the shuttle's central diagnostic port. There is if you do not touch the hardware directly. He asked for a maintenance reader. The engineer hesitated, then handed him a thin Royal diagnostic tablet. Ethan connected it to the shuttle and scanned the service history. Hundreds of entries rolled past. Most were automatic checks, software updates, and launch certifications. Then one line caught his attention. There. Nora stepped closer. What is it? A remote maintenance command 6 hours before your departure. Hale's face hardened. Authorized by whom? Ethan enlarged the entry. The identification field had been cleared, but the access tier remained visible. Royal Internal. Highest maintenance privilege. One of the engineers whispered, only senior logistics personnel can issue that level of command. Nora became very still. So the person who disabled my shuttle did not need to be near it. No, Ethan said. They only needed permission to make the shuttle obey. A low hum rolled across the dock before anyone could respond. Every royal work light flickered. Ethan looked up. Across Dock 17, windows dimmed one building at a time. The repair yard signs went dark. The heating vents beneath the walkways stopped steaming. Then the Royal diagnostic tablet in Ethan's hand lost power. For half a second, the entire settlement became silent. Nora looked toward the darkened horizon. Is that normal? Ethan listened to the absence of machinery, and a cold feeling settled deeper than the weather. Not even close. : Writing variant equals document ID equals 81427, title equals part 8. The silence lasted only 3 seconds before Kestrel 9 began to wake in the wrong way. Emergency sirens sounded somewhere beyond Dock 17, low and uneven, while red battery lights flickered on above the frozen walkways. Ethan was already moving. How long before the heating grid restarts? Nora asked as she followed him toward the garage. If this were a normal outage, maybe 2 minutes. Ethan glanced at the dark utility towers along the horizon. This is not normal. He reached coal repair, forced the stiff bay door open, and crossed directly to a yellow portable generator tucked beneath a shelf of engine parts. The machine was old enough to have mechanical switches instead of a touch display, but Ethan maintained it like everything else he depended on. He checked the fuel gauge. 41%. Commander Hale. Nora said into her communicator, status. Static answered first, then Hale's voice. The central thermal grid is offline. Royal systems remain operational. We are preparing immediate evacuation. Nora looked toward Ethan. He had already wrapped a power cable around one shoulder. Evacuation for whom? For you, Your Highness. Ethan pulled the generator onto a small cargo sled. Makes sense. Nora stared at him. You agree? Royal security is not exactly famous for leaving princesses in blackouts. He started toward the door. Where are you going? Shelter 3. Why? Ethan gave her a look that suggested the answer should have been obvious. Because their backup unit failed last month. Outside, the wind had returned, pushing loose snow and silver waves across the dark settlement. Without the thermal grid, steam no longer rose from the street vents. People were emerging from apartments in coats and emergency wraps, their faces lit by handheld lamps. Ethan pulled the sled faster. Shelter 3 occupied an old freight warehouse near the residential quarter. By the time he arrived, nearly 30 people had gathered inside, including several children and 2 elderly minors. The building's emergency lights worked, but its heaters did not. Ethan positioned the generator beside the main junction box and began connecting cables. Nora watched him kneel on the cold floor, fingers moving quickly over clamps and terminals. "This is your backup generator," she said. "Yes. For your garage. Usually. And if the outage continues?" Ethan tightened the final connector. "Then my garage gets cold." Nora's expression hardened. "Again?" Ethan looked up. "Again what?" "Again you are giving away the thing you need. They need it more." He flipped the generator switch. The engine coughed once, twice, then settled into a rough, steady rumble. A moment later, the shelter heaters began pushing warm air through the vents. A little girl standing beside her mother held both hands over the nearest register and smiled. Ethan saw Nora watching her. Something in the princess's face changed. Not surprised this time. Recognition. "You really do not calculate value the way we do," she said quietly. Ethan stood and wiped his hands on his pants. "People are not engine parts, Nora. You do not rank them by replacement cost." Her communicator sounded again. Hale's voice was more urgent now. "Your Highness, the royal shuttle is ready. Temperatures across the settlement are dropping. We need to leave immediately." Nora looked toward the open shelter door, where the distant thermal towers remained dark. Then she looked at Ethan, at the old generator now warming strangers instead of his home. "No," she said. Hale paused. "Your Highness." Nora pulled on Ethan's spare work gloves from the top of the tool bag. "I said no. If Kestrel 9 is staying cold, then S: Nora had spent most of her life surrounded by people who moved when she entered a room, opened doors before she reached them, and solved problems before she ever saw them. Shelter 3 offered none of that. The air smelled of cold metal, damp coats, machine oil, and the faint electrical heat from Ethan's aging generator. Children sat close to the vents while adults carried blankets, water containers, and portable lamps from one end of the warehouse to the other. Nobody bowed. Nobody waited for permission. They simply worked. Nora looked down at the worn mechanic gloves covering her turquoise hands. The fingertips were too large for her, and one thumb had been repaired with dark thermal tape. "These are terrible," she said. Ethan was kneeling beside a junction box, checking the amperage flowing from the generator. "Those are premium equipment. They have a hole in one finger. Ventilation." Nora gave him a flat look. "How much did they cost?" 10 credits. "You are lying." 12, if you count the tape. For the first time since the blackout, Nora laughed. It was brief, but several frightened faces nearby turned toward the sound, and some of the tension seemed to leave the room with it. Ethan handed her a coil of insulated cable. "If you are serious about staying, carry this to the east wall." Nora lifted it. The cable was heavier than it looked. Royal duties continue to become more glamorous. "Wait until you meet the frozen drain pump." She followed him through the shelter, helping connect portable heaters to the temporary circuit. At one point, a small alien boy began shivering near the entrance. Nora stopped without thinking, removed the outer thermal wrap from her shoulders, and placed it around him. Ethan saw the motion, but said nothing. That silence mattered more than praise would have. 20 minutes later, Commander Hale arrived with 2 technicians and a portable grid monitor. His polished uniform looked strangely out of place among the patched coats and cargo crates. "Your Highness, evacuation remains available." Nora tightened one of Ethan's cable clamps. "So does work." Hale looked toward Ethan. "What is the situation?" Ethan studied the monitor. "The settlement is drawing emergency power, but the central thermal network is still refusing every restart command." "Mechanical failure?" "Maybe, but I am starting to dislike coincidences." Nora moved beside him. The grid display showed dozens of dark sectors spread across Kestrel 9. Ethan enlarged the shutdown log. A command string appeared 3 seconds before the entire network failed. He stared at it, then asked Hale for the diagnostic record from Nora's shuttle. Hale transferred the file. Ethan placed the two command signatures side by side. Same timing pattern, same authorization architecture, same thermal control language. Nora saw his expression. What? Ethan pointed to the matching sequences. Your suit was disabled with a controlled thermal command. Your shuttle was altered through a remote maintenance request. Now the colony heating grid has been shut down using the same command family. Hill's face tightened. That is impossible. These systems belong to different networks. Different doors, Ethan said. Same key. Nora looked across the shelter, where families gathered around the temporary heaters. Her voice became very quiet. Then the blackout was not an accident. Ethan checked the grid status again. A warning symbol had appeared beneath the central thermal station. Internal pressure was rising. No, he said. And whoever did this is not finished yet. The warning symbol on the grid monitor changed from amber to red. Ethan leaned closer, watching the pressure numbers climb inside Kestrel 9's central thermal station. That reactor is not failing, he said. It is being told to fail. Commander Hale looked at him sharply. Explain. Ethan enlarged the control history. Someone shut the circulation pumps, locked the automatic bypass, and disabled remote restart. 3 separate safety systems do not make the same mistake at the same time. Nora stood beside him, still wearing Ethan's battered gloves. Who has authority to issue those commands? Hale hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Nora's voice hardened. Commander, Royal Logistics has emergency access to colonial infrastructure, he admitted. For disaster response and supply coordination. Ethan traced the authorization path backward through the system. Most identifying data had been erased, but one routing number remained buried beneath the maintenance commands. Hale stared at it. That channel belongs to Minister Adrian Cross. Nora became completely still. Ethan looked between them. Friend of yours? He oversees energy distribution across the northern colonies, Nora said quietly. He also approved my inspection visit to Kestrel 9. Ethan understood before she finished. You were investigating him. Nora looked toward the families gathered around the temporary heaters. For 6 months, outer settlements have reported missing reactor parts, reduced fuel shipments, and unexplained maintenance shortages. Official records said everything had been delivered. Ethan glanced around Shelter 3. Old heaters, repaired cables, a backup generator that should have been replaced years ago. But it never arrived. Not all of it. Hale's communicator sounded. A calm male voice filled the shelter. Your Highness, I strongly recommend immediate departure. Nora's expression changed. Minister Cross, the colony is experiencing a severe infrastructure emergency. Your safety must take priority. Ethan watched the pressure gauge continue rising. Interesting timing, he murmured. Cross continued as if he had not heard. The royal vessel should leave orbit before the thermal station becomes unstable. Nora stepped closer to the communicator. Why would the station become unstable, Adrian? A pause. Small, but noticeable. That is the natural consequence of a complete heating grid failure. Ethan shook his head. Nora saw it. No, she said. It is the consequence of someone disabling the coolant bypass. Silence followed. Then Cross spoke again, his voice colder. You are relying on the opinion of a dock mechanic? Ethan almost smiled. I have been called worse. Nora did not. This dock mechanic found the same command architecture in my suit, my shuttle, and this colony's thermal system. Another pause. Hale quietly began transmitting the logs to the royal ship. Cross seemed to understand what that meant. Your Highness, whatever you believe, remaining there is irresponsible. Leave now. Nora looked at Ethan. The monitor showed pressure climbing past the safe operating range. How long? She asked. Ethan calculated quickly. Maybe 40 minutes before the system locks beyond remote recovery. Less if another pump shuts down. Hale stepped forward. Then we evacuate. Ethan was already packing tools into his bag. Nora saw him. What are you doing? Going to the thermal station. Ethan, you just said the system is unstable. That is why I am going. Hale shook his head. Royal engineers can handle it. Ethan pointed toward the monitor. The remote controls are compromised. Somebody needs to open the bypass manually. Nora's violet eyes held his. And if you leave with us? Ethan looked across the shelter. The little boy still wore Nora's thermal wrap. Families stood close to vents powered by a generator that could not warm an entire colony. Outside, the temperature continued falling. Ethan lifted his toolbox. Then everybody else stays cold. Ethan reached the central thermal station with 19 minutes left on the pressure forecast and ice already forming across the outer access door. The building rose from the snow like a dark steel block, its ventilation towers silent against the gray morning sky. Commander Hale had sent 2 royal technicians with him, but the moment they reached the main control chamber, every automated panel displayed the same message: remote authority locked. Ethan set his toolbox on the floor. Of course it is. Nora's voice came through his communicator. Tell me you have a better option. Ethan removed the lower maintenance cover from the control console. I have an older option. Beneath the polished digital systems ran a maze of physical valves, mechanical relays, and manual pressure lines installed when Kestrel 9 was first built. Technology changed. Pipes still needed somewhere to send heat. He followed the coolant diagram until he found the emergency bypass route. The actuator is frozen closed, he said. Can you release it? Hale asked over the channel. Not from here. Ethan looked toward a narrow service corridor leading deeper into the station. Warm mist drifted from its ceiling vents, meeting the freezing air and turning immediately to frost. I need to reach the valve itself. Nora answered at once. Ethan, the pressure is still rising. I noticed. He carried his tools down the corridor as metal groaned softly around him. The temperature changed with every step. One wall felt bitterly cold through his jacket. The next radiated uncomfortable heat. At the end of the passage, he found the bypass assembly, a heavy wheel almost 3 feet across, locked beneath a crust of ice. Ethan attached a manual leverage bar and pulled. Nothing moved. Come on, he muttered. The communicator crackled. Nora's voice was quieter now. Ethan, busy. The royal ship has enough reactor output to support the settlement grid. He stopped pulling, then connected. Royal protocol forbids direct reactor transfer to civilian infrastructure without council authorization. Ethan stared at the frozen valve. How long does authorization take? Hale answered this time. Under normal circumstances, several hours. Ethan almost laughed. Then you have a very well-organized way to freeze. Silence followed. Then Nora spoke. What happens if I order the transfer myself? Hale hesitated. Your Highness, it would violate energy security law. That was not my question. Another pause. The ship can stabilize the colony. Ethan smiled despite the cold. Sounds useful. Nora's voice changed, becoming the same steady command Ethan had heard when the Royal Guards first entered his garage. Commander Hale, connect the Royal Reactor to Kestrel 9. Your Highness, that is an order. Ethan heard movement and overlapping voices through the communicator. Then Hale answered simply, Yes, Your Highness. A deep vibration traveled through the station floor several seconds later. On Ethan's wrist display, incoming power began climbing. But the bypass valve remained locked. We still need circulation, Ethan said. He braced both boots against the floor and pulled the leverage bar again. The wheel shifted less than an inch. He reset his grip. Pulled again. Another inch. Somewhere overhead, dormant pumps began waking one by one. Low hums became steady mechanical rhythms. Ethan could feel the station changing around him, like a machine taking its first breath after a long sleep. Pressure dropping, one technician reported. Ethan pulled once more. The wheel finally turned. A rushing vibration traveled through the pipe beneath his hands as coolant entered the bypass line. On his display, the red warning fell to amber, then yellow, then green. Across Kestrel 9, lights began returning in scattered clusters. Heating towers awakened. Street vents breathed steam into the frozen morning. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhausted, listening to the pump settle into a steady rhythm. Nora's voice came softly through the communicator. You can come back now. Ethan looked at the green pressure reading and allowed himself one tired smile. Yeah, he said. Now I can. By the time Ethan returned to Shelter 3, the first real warmth of the morning was moving through Kestrel 9. Steam curled from street vents again. Frost retreated from the shelter windows, and the old generator beside the wall had finally been switched off. Nora was waiting near the entrance with Commander Hale. She still wore Ethan's patchwork gloves. You look terrible, she said. Ethan set his toolbox down. That means the heating system looks better. Before Nora could answer, Hale's communicator chimed. Your Highness, the Council has reviewed the transmitted records. Minister Cross has been removed from operational authority pending a full investigation. His access credentials are locked. Nora closed her eyes for a moment, more relieved than triumphant. And the missing colony shipments. Auditors are already tracing them. Ethan glanced toward the families inside the shelter. Good, because somebody owes this place a lot of heaters. Less than an hour later, Ethan found himself standing inside a temporary Royal Command room assembled aboard the White Dreadnought. The polished floor reflected his stained boots so clearly that he almost felt obligated to apologize to it. Several council representatives appeared through holographic displays. One elderly official addressed him with ceremonial seriousness. Mr. Cole, House Astor recognizes that your actions preserved the life of the Crown Princess and contributed directly to the restoration of Kestrel 9. Appropriate compensation has been authorized. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Here we go. Nora heard him. Try behaving for 5 minutes. No promises. The official continued. You may receive 500,000 credits, full royal citizenship, relocation to any central system, and ownership of a fully equipped engineering facility. Ethan stared at the hologram. 500,000 credits. Enough to replace his furnace. Enough to erase every debt attached to coal repair. Enough to leave Dock 17 forever. Nora watched him carefully. You have earned it, she said. Ethan looked through the observation window instead. Far below, Kestrel 9 stretched across the snow. The thermal towers were running again, but several still flickered irregularly. He remembered Shelter 3, the broken backup unit, the patch cables, the little boy warming his hands over air that had almost stopped coming. How much does a new planetary thermal grid cost? He asked. The council chamber became quiet. One official blinked. I beg your pardon. Ethan pointed toward the colony. Not repairs. Replacement. New pumps, new control systems, independent backups. Enough spare parts that nobody has to wait 3 months for a shipment that may never arrive. Nora understood before anyone else did. Ethan. He looked at her. You asked what I wanted. The financial minister on the display hesitated. A complete modernization would greatly exceed your personal reward. Then keep the reward. Nora's violet eyes stayed on him. Ethan continued. Use it as the first payment. Take whatever else you were planning to spend on ceremonies, medals, speeches, whatever royal people do after something like this, and put it into the grid. One council member leaned forward. You would refuse personal compensation? Ethan shrugged. My garage needs a furnace. Kestrel 9 needs not to freeze. Nora looked down at the worn gloves on her hands. The same man who had given away his last heater was now being offered enough money to never worry about cold again, and somehow he was still thinking about everyone else. She turned toward the council. The Kestrel Thermal Initiative is authorized under my office. Full modernization. Royal Emergency Infrastructure Funds. Several holographic faces reacted at once. Nora raised one hand. Silence returned. And make it permanent. No colony under House Astor will depend on a single heating system again. Ethan looked at her. That sounds expensive. Nora finally smiled. You are a terrible influence, Mr. Cole. 3 months later, Kestrel 9 sounded different. Ethan noticed it before he noticed anything else. The old thermal towers had once groaned through every cold morning, coughing steam through corroded valves and vibrating hard enough to rattle windows across Dock 17. The new towers barely made a sound. Warm air flowed beneath the streets in steady measured currents. Snow melted cleanly from the main walkways, and for the first time anyone could remember, children walked to school without emergency heating packs clipped to their coats. Coal repair had changed less. Ethan had accepted exactly one improvement from the Royal Infrastructure crews, a new furnace. Everything else remained stubbornly familiar. The same scratched workbench. The same coffee tin filled with loose bolts. The same faded nameplate beneath his own sign. He was tightening a coolant manifold on an agricultural shuttle when a soft vibration passed through the floor. Ethan looked toward the bay entrance. Please do not be another dreadnought, he muttered. It was not. A small white royal shuttle descended outside and settled gently onto the snow. No formation of guards followed. No ceremony waited behind it. The door opened, and Nora stepped down alone. She wore a simple dark travel coat over her turquoise skin, her silver-white hair moving lightly in the cold breeze. She carried something rectangular beneath one arm. Ethan wiped his hands on a shop towel. You know, Most customers schedule appointments. I am told royal privilege remains useful for avoiding paperwork. Dangerous habit. Nora entered the garage and placed the object on his workbench. Ethan stared at it. His old portable heater looked almost new. The dents remained, but the casing had been cleaned, the damaged controls replaced, and the faded manufacturer plate polished enough to read again. You repaired it, Ethan said. Royal engineers repaired it. Nora paused. After 3 of them argued for 2 days about why you had connected a mining relay to a residential heater. Ethan nodded solemnly. Innovation frightens people. Apparently. He plugged the heater into a wall outlet and turned the dial. Click, click. The fan began to spin. A weak stream of warm air brushed across his hands. Ethan smiled. Still sounds terrible. They offered to replace the motor. Then it would not be mine. Nora seemed to have expected that answer. Outside the garage windows, one of the new thermal towers glowed softly against the pale afternoon sky. The Kestrel Thermal Initiative had already expanded to 6 neighboring settlements. Emergency reserves had been tripled. Independent backup grids were being installed across the northern colonies. The royal reports called it infrastructure reform. Ethan still thought of it as making sure nobody needed to decide who received the last heater. Nora stood beside him, watching the little machine hum. The council still does not understand why you refused the money. That makes 2 of us. Some mornings I understand it less than others. She smiled, then became quiet. I understand now. Ethan looked at her. Nora rested one gloved hand near the heater, feeling the thin stream of warmth. That night, I thought you were giving something away because you did not understand its value. Her violet eyes lifted to his. I was wrong. You understood exactly what it was worth. You simply thought another life was worth more. Ethan looked away toward the open garage door. Snow drifted slowly across Dock 17, but nobody hurried through it anymore. Windows glowed warmly. Street vents breathed steady clouds into the air. Somewhere beyond the settlement, the new towers continued their quiet work. You were cold, he said. I had a heater. Nora stood beside him without answering. She did not need to. The little heater clicked again between them. Above Kestrel 9, a royal shuttle rested beneath a gray sky. Below it stood a mechanic who had never possessed enough money to change a world, yet somehow had. Not because he was powerful. Not because anyone had ordered him to. He had simply seen someone freezing and decided that warmth was meant to be shared.